The cold bench pressed into Walt Jennings' spine like a warning, stiff and unwelcome beneath his wool coat. He shifted his weight, but the ache in his lower back reminded him it wasn't the bench's fault. The bus was late again, 10 minutes now, maybe more. The sky above the cracked concrete station was a pale, disinterested gray, the kind that made it hard to tell what time of day it really was. Morning, probably, though mornings and afternoons had started to blur together these days. The city was different now, hollowed out. The shops along 9th and Jefferson were closed or boarded, the newspaper stand next to the terminal long gone. Walt used to drive this route, back when people still depended on buses. Now it was mostly folks like him, older, slower, forgotten, watching younger people zip by in rideshares or on electric scooters, earbuds in, eyes forward, nowhere to connect. A teenager leaned against the bus shelter's plexiglass, thumbing his phone. Walt tried not to take it personally when the boy didn't even glance up at him. Nobody did anymore. He was just another part of the scenery now, like the gum stains on the sidewalk or the flickering, out of order, sign over the vending machine. His fingers, stiff with arthritis, fumbled to open the newspaper he'd picked up from the grocery store's free rack. The print was fading, ink barely clinging to the cheap paper. Local crime, school closures, something about a new parking ordinance. Then, in the business section, a headline grabbed him: Elon Musk's boring company proposes new underground loop in Chicago, traffic is soul-crushing, says Musk. Walt blinked, squinting to read the smaller text. There was a rendering of sleek white pods zipping through neon-lit tunnels beneath a city that was not his own. He ran his hand over the page, almost as if he could feel the movement underground. The article mentioned reduced commute times, zero emissions, self-driving modules. All the things he used to dream about back when he wore a uniform and held a clipboard full of transit schedules. He thought about a quote he'd once heard Musk say in an old interview, something like, "If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the traffic." It made him smirk bitterly. He'd been both, once. Now he was neither. The bus finally hissed to a stop, late and groaning like it didn't want to be there any more than he did. Walt climbed aboard, greeted the driver, a kid barely out of his 20s, who nodded but didn't speak. The bus smelled like wet rubber and coffee. He took a seat by the window, the same seat he used to avoid when he drove because of the sun glare. As the city rolled by, tired and slow, he couldn't stop thinking about those tunnels. Something about them unsettled him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him feel alert for the first time in months. Underground. Quiet. Efficient. Visionary. It was everything the surface wasn't anymore. He remembered when he first pitched something similar to his old supervisor in '88, he called it the glide rail, a pneumatic-powered, underground network designed to ease congestion and limit pollution. They laughed him out of the room. "You trying to build Disneyland under the city, Walt?" someone had joked. It stung. He buried the sketches in a drawer and never brought it up again. Diane had encouraged him, of course. She always did. "The world needs wild ideas," she'd said one night while washing dishes. "Even if it's not ready for them yet." God, how he missed her. As the bus turned onto Grant Avenue, past the shuttered library and the crumbling brick facades of what used to be a lively block, Walt caught his reflection in the scratched window. 72, white hair thinning, eyes tired but still sharp. He didn't recognize himself anymore. Not really. People used to listen when he spoke. Now, even his own son barely returned a phone call. Mark was busy, a consultant out in Denver, probably on a plane somewhere right now, giving a presentation to people who still thought change was possible. Walt sighed, pulled his coat tighter, and looked down again at the newspaper folded on his lap. The tunnel image burned into his mind. What if it wasn't too late to try again? Not to build tunnels exactly, not at his age, but to contribute something, anything, to a future that didn't just roll on without him. A strange energy stirred in his chest. He dismissed it quickly. Hope was a dangerous thing. Hope made you a fool. He got off the bus 2 stops early, something he hadn't done in years. His feet carried him not home, but toward the old depot, just to see it. The building was mostly shuttered now, a relic of the past with weeds growing up through the cracks in the pavement and rust streaks down its once proud pillars. He peered through a broken window. Dust coated everything. Rows of outdated equipment, old filing cabinets, and forgotten blueprints. Memories flickered. The smell of diesel and coffee. The sound of dispatch calls over the radio. Diane waiting outside with a thermos in hand. He walked around the side of the building, his cane tapping softly against the concrete, and found the old utility entrance still half-hinged. Nobody cared about the place anymore. He stepped inside. The air was thick, musty, but it felt good. Familiar. Like visiting an old friend. In the corner of what used to be his office, he found it, the filing cabinet where he'd stored his original glide rail designs. He pulled the drawer open and there they were, yellowed graph paper, curled at the edges, but intact. Diagrams, notes, rough schematics drawn by hand with the kind of care and passion he hadn't felt in decades. He sat down on a milk crate and stared at them for a long time. He could almost hear Diane's voice again, "You've still got it, Walt." He didn't know if that was true, but for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. He took the papers, rolled them carefully, and tucked them under his arm. The walk home felt different. His step wasn't quicker, but it was steadier. As he passed a mural of city pioneers, founders, mayors, innovators, he paused. None of them looked like him. None were over 70. None seemed to come from the worn side of town. But maybe that didn't matter. Maybe legacy wasn't about age or titles, but action. He thought of something else Elon Musk had said in that same interview, "You're going to die anyway. Might as well do something remarkable." That night, Walt cleared off his kitchen table and unrolled the plans. The lamp cast a golden pool of light, just like it used to. He picked up a pencil, hesitated, then started sketching updates. Tunnels that accounted for autonomous navigation. Lightweight composite tubes. Battery recharge stations. Ideas spilled out of him like they'd been waiting. He wasn't thinking about whether it would work. He was thinking about how it could. And somehow, that felt like enough. Outside, the wind howled against the siding, but inside, it was warm. Walt leaned back, cracked his knuckles, and looked at what he'd drawn. It wasn't perfect, not even close. But it was something. Maybe even a beginning. The world hadn't asked him to come back. It hadn't offered permission. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting for an invitation. Because what if everything he believed about getting old, about being done, was wrong? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Walt Jennings used to be someone. Not famous, not rich, not the kind of man whose name was printed in bold on office doors or stitched into jackets, but someone people turned to. People trusted him. Back when the city's transit system was still the lifeblood of the neighborhoods and not the forgotten appendage it had become, Walt wore his driver's uniform with quiet pride. He wasn't just a man who drove buses, he was a keeper of schedules, a watcher of faces, a small constant in the lives of people just trying to get where they were going. He remembered the exact sound the brakes made on Route 5 when it curved into East Market Street, the coffee he'd always grab at 6:08 a.m. sharp, and the older woman named Ruth who brought him a warm scone every Thursday for 5 years. That was life then, steady, useful, alive in its own small rhythm. That rhythm stopped the day Diane died. Cancer. It always sounds too simple when you say it that way. She was gone before he could finish all the things he thought they'd do in retirement. She was the only person who ever truly believed in his tunnel idea, the one who sat beside him night after night as he drafted sketches with a ruler and a stubborn pencil, saying things like, "You're not crazy, you're just early," while pouring them both lukewarm chamomile tea. The day she passed, something in him went quiet. Not dead, just quiet, like a machine left running with the sound turned off. His son, Mark, flew in for the funeral, gave a speech that made everyone cry, hugged him once, and then left 3 days later, back to Denver, back to his world of briefcases and business flights and scheduled silence. The house was too big without her. Too still. Diane had filled it with warmth, from the lavender smell of her lotion to the ridiculous way she would sing old doo-wop songs while folding laundry. After she was gone, Walt tried to keep it all going. The garden, the Thursday chicken casserole, the crossword puzzles they always solved in tandem. But time kept slipping by, and before long, the garden wilted, the kitchen stayed dark, and the crosswords were half-finished and smudged with thumbprints. People called less. Mark called less. He didn't blame him. What was there to say? He didn't want to be that father, the one who guilt-tripped his adult child into Sunday check-ins and reluctant visits. He wanted to be the dad who still inspired something. But that kind of dad belonged to a time before everything slowed down. His knees didn't work the way they used to. His back ached when he stood too long. The steps up to the bedroom were now a daily Everest, and sometimes he slept in the recliner just to avoid the climb. He'd gotten used to muting his hopes, especially the one about the underground transit idea. He used to talk about it all the time. How cities could be better, how streets didn't need to choke with traffic, how underground tubes using magnetic levitation could change everything. He had diagrams, calculations, little models made from cardboard and string. He even submitted it to a local university back in 1992. They never replied. There was one day, decades ago, when a regional planner from the mayor's office came to the depot for an inspection. Walt had pulled him aside and shown him the blueprints. The man chuckled and said, "You got passion, I'll give you that. But this ain't the Jetsons, Mr. Jennings. Be happy we're getting new tires." After that, he kept his ideas to himself, except when Diane asked about them. She always did, every time he got that faraway look like he was seeing through the walls and into something better. The years moved on. Budgets got slashed. The city shrunk. The depots closed. The buses got older. Walt took his pension and went home. Retirement was supposed to be a reward, but it felt like exile. He watched the news, kept the lawn trimmed, and tried to fill the hours. But the ache for usefulness never left. It lingered in his fingertips, in the space behind his eyes when he closed them at night. Sometimes he'd wake up thinking he was late for a shift, only to remember there were no more shifts, no more routes, just quiet. One memory returned often, uninvited but vivid. It was of the day he and Diane took the subway in New York during their 25th anniversary trip. It was the first time they'd been on a rail mass transit system outside their city. Walt had been enchanted. The hum of the rails, the efficiency, the sense that movement was power. Diane teased him for grinning like a kid on a roller coaster. "You'd live down here if they let you," she said, squeezing his hand. That night in the hotel, he scribbled an idea on a napkin: subsurface pod transport, frictionless, airless, efficient. He carried that napkin in his wallet for years. It disintegrated eventually, but the idea never did. He could never get the city to listen. Too big. Too expensive. Too advanced. The excuses piled up until even he stopped defending it. What right did a bus driver have to reimagine urban travel? He wasn't an engineer. He wasn't rich. He wasn't young. But something shifted when he saw that article about the Boring Company. It wasn't just the technology, it was the audacity. Tunnels under cities. Pods in motion. Real prototypes. Real implementation. What he once saw as fantasy, now had funding, momentum, headlines. Elon Musk wasn't afraid to break rules. He didn't wait for permission. That realization stirred something old in Walt. A quiet rebellion against the years that had told him his time had passed. He wasn't angry at the world, not really, just disappointed in how easily it discarded people like him, people with ideas that didn't come wrapped in tech jargon or venture capital. And for the first time in a long while, he thought, maybe he wasn't too late. Maybe he was just waiting for the world to catch up. Or maybe he just needed to catch up to himself. That night, after seeing the article, he sat alone at the kitchen table with a mug of decaf and opened the bottom drawer of the sideboard. Inside was the old tube where he kept his sketches. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the lines still sang. He unrolled one and smoothed it out. There it was, the heart of his old dream. Multiple layers of city movement, pedestrian, electric bikes, cargo, pods. The vision had always been bigger than just cars and traffic. It was about giving people dignity through motion. About making the city breathable again. He realized he'd stopped dreaming when Diane died. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to dream for both of them. The next morning, he called the library. He hadn't been there in over a decade, but the voice on the other end sounded young and eager. Her name was Casey. "We've got computers, databases, news archives," she said. "You'll be surprised how much has changed." He was, indeed. The library had been remodeled. There were plants, skylights, digital kiosks. Casey was maybe in her late 20s, smart glasses, short curly hair, and a kindness that didn't feel forced. She showed him how to search patents, how to pull engineering white papers, even helped him find the latest boring company specs. "Are you working on something?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "Just picking up something I never quite finished." She smiled. "Well, maybe it's time." That night, he brought his blueprints back to life. He revised, updated, reimagined. He didn't know who would care. But that wasn't the point, not yet. The point was this: he wasn't done. And maybe he never had been. Walt sat by the window, the same seat in his house where Diane used to knit while watching the birds pick at the feeder. Outside, the sycamore tree leaned just slightly to the left, the way it always had, bending under years of lake-effect wind. His breath fogged the glass as he stared out, unmoving, lost in the war raging quietly inside him. The idea had taken root again, that old stubborn vision. It had returned, unwanted at first, but now relentless, knocking at every hour of the day with the same question: what if you're not done yet? What if you still matter? And right behind that came the more familiar voice, the one that never needed to shout because it had been whispering inside him for decades now: what if it's too late? He turned away from the window and looked at the stack of sketches on the table. Some of the newer ones were digital printouts, diagrams he and Casey had downloaded from online transit databases, others were his, refined versions of his original tunnel network, updated for a world that now spoke in EVs and autonomy and AI. The problem wasn't the technology. It was him. Who was going to listen to a 72-year-old retiree with no degree, no money, and no title? He didn't even own a working smartphone. He still paid bills by mailing checks. He didn't know Python or CAD or whatever it was young engineers used now. He had pencils and instincts and a gut feeling that cities were breaking apart because people had stopped believing they could be stitched back together. Later that week, he had his 6-month checkup. His doctor, a man 20 years his junior with the bedside warmth of a filing cabinet, glanced over Walt's chart like it was a formality. "You've lost some strength in your right knee," he said, tapping at a screen. "Blood pressure's high. Cholesterol's holding." Walt nodded, half listening. The doctor peered over his glasses. "I'd ease up a bit. You've done your part. No need to overextend." The word ease hit Walt like a shove. That's what the world thought he should be doing. Easing into irrelevance. Letting the years do their quiet erasing. He walked home that day slower than usual, but not because of his knee. Because his mind was moving too fast. That night, he watched a podcast on YouTube. Casey had shown him how to cast it to his TV, and after typing Elon Musk tunnels into the search bar, he'd found a 2-hour interview from a tech conference. Musk, in his signature black jacket and oddly casual tone, sat across from a bearded moderator who asked, "A lot of people think you're doing too much. That some things just can't be changed. What do you say to that?" Elon didn't hesitate. "That's loser talk," he said. "Everything changes. The only question is, will you be part of it?" The audience laughed, but Walt didn't. He felt like Musk had looked straight through the screen into his chest. "Will you be part of it?" It wasn't a challenge. It was an accusation. Over the following days, Walt found himself scribbling more than usual. He couldn't sleep. Not from pain, but from the thrum of energy under his skin that hadn't been there in years. He felt foolish sometimes, sitting up at 2 a.m. with graph paper and a magnifying lamp, sketching out routes under a city that barely cared about surface transit. But then he'd think about what Diane would say. Foolish dreams are just dreams that haven't found their time yet. He missed her voice more than he missed his own youth. Because she believed in the part of him that still felt like it could do something big. And now, with every clip he watched, every tweet he read, every diagram Casey pulled for him from those tech blogs and journals, he saw that someone else, someone in the real world, was doing the things he only once imagined. Elon Musk was digging under cities. Building pods. Moving people. It wasn't just science fiction anymore. It was happening. And Walt couldn't decide if that made him feel validated, or obsolete. A week later, he showed one of his revised blueprints to his neighbor's son, Kevin, a college student home for break. Kevin had grown up next door, polite enough, always carrying a laptop or skateboarding with earbuds in. Walt didn't expect much when he asked, "Mind taking a look at something?" Kevin leaned over the table, scanning the diagrams. "Cool," he said after a minute. "You make this?" Walt nodded. "It's a kind of microtunnel system. Low cost. Built beneath aging surface routes." Kevin shrugged. "Nice idea. Doubt anyone would go for it though. Too complicated. And you'd need a tech angle, right? Maybe an app or some AI integration or..." His voice trailed off as he looked back at his phone. Walt felt it again, the dismissal. Not cruel. Just indifferent. The worst kind. He didn't blame the kid. The world had been conditioned to think that bold ideas only came from places with glass walls and standing desks. From men in black turtlenecks or eccentric billionaires. Not from aging men with notebooks full of graphite and memory. That night, Walt almost threw the sketches away. He laid them out on the table, stared at them for a long time, then rolled them into a tight bundle. But instead of the trash, he set them beside the front door. Something inside him, something deeper than pride, wouldn't let him give up just yet. The next day, he walked 3 blocks to the community center. There was going to be a local planning forum there that afternoon, and even though it was an open mic, he figured maybe someone might at least take a look. The place was already buzzing with people when he arrived, residents, activists, a few young staffers with tablets and lanyards. Walt stood in the back, quietly waiting. He didn't expect a miracle. He just wanted to be heard. When the Q&A began, he raised his hand. No one called on him. Twice. But just as they were wrapping up, a middle-aged woman at the podium gestured toward him. "Last one," she said. Walt cleared his throat. "I have an idea about transit," he said. "It's not just a complaint, it's a plan." People turned. A few looked at their watches. Someone near the front rolled their eyes. "Just send it to the email," one of the staffers muttered. But the woman at the podium said, "Let him speak." Walt walked forward, hands trembling only slightly, unrolling his diagrams. "We've spent decades trying to fix the surface. What if the solution isn't on the surface anymore?" He explained his idea as best he could. Low-cost tunnel routes. Adaptable pod systems. Integration with existing electric vehicles. No need to wait for federal grants. Start small. Start local. When he finished, the room was quiet. The moderator smiled tightly. Interesting. Thank you. That was it. No applause. No follow-up. He rolled up his sketches and turned to leave, heart pounding with a mix of shame and adrenaline. On the sidewalk outside, the wind slapped at his coat. He felt foolish again. An old man clinging to a dream long since expired. But as he waited for the bus, a voice called from behind. Hey! He turned. It was a young woman, maybe late 20s, dressed in a city transit jacket. You said low-cost tunnels. Like Musk's system? Walt nodded, unsure if she was mocking him. She shook her head. My brother's obsessed with that stuff. Boring company. Pods. Hyperloop. You sounded like you knew what you were talking about. He smiled faintly. I do. At least. I used to. She pulled a card from her coat. Send me your designs. Maybe someone higher up will want to see them. Can't promise anything, but it's something. As the bus pulled up, Walt looked down at the card. Her name was Lindsay Patel. City Infrastructure Liaison. It wasn't much. But it was something. That night, as he walked into his house, he passed the photo of Diane on the hallway table. He paused, touched the frame gently, and said, I think I said it out loud, Dee. I really did. For the first time in years, he didn't fall asleep thinking about endings. He fell asleep thinking about beginnings. Walt stared at the email draft for nearly 20 minutes, his index finger hovering over the trackpad like it weighed 50 pounds. The diagrams were scanned, compressed, and attached. The subject line read, Urban Microtunnel Concept Proposal. He'd rewritten the message 5 times already, trying to sound clear but not desperate, technical but not arrogant, hopeful but not naive. The cursor blinked like it was mocking him. He wasn't used to this kind of thing. Pitching. Sending ideas out into the void. For most of his life, he'd clocked in, clocked out, made things run on time. That was his job. You didn't need to stand out. You just needed to be steady. Dependable. Now, he had to ask for attention, for validation, in a world that barely looked up from its phone. It wasn't just a message, it was a risk. A choice to step out of the shadows and say, I'm still here. I still have something to give. Finally, he exhaled, clicked send, and pushed himself back from the desk. The room was quiet. Nothing exploded. No fireworks. No thunder. Just silence and the slow tick of the kitchen clock. But something had shifted. Not outside, but in him. The simple act of sending that email felt like shaking off layers of dust. The next morning, he walked. Not to the store. Not to the depot. He walked without purpose, something he hadn't done in years. Around the block, through the little park behind the middle school, past the library where Casey had first shown him the patents. His knees hurt, but he didn't stop. He wasn't testing his strength. He was testing his will. And as he moved through streets he used to drive, he saw the city differently, not as a place crumbling into decline, but as a skeleton waiting for someone to rebuild it. Everywhere he looked, he saw potential. Sidewalks too narrow for wheelchairs. Bus stops too exposed for the elderly. Empty medians that could hide access points to underground transit. What if all this was still usable? What if the world wasn't finished, it just needed someone to start asking the right questions again? When he got home, sweaty and out of breath but oddly alive, he found a reply waiting in his inbox. It was from Lindsay Patel. The message was brief. Thanks for sending this over. I forwarded it to my supervisor. He's curious. Can we set up a Zoom call tomorrow? 3 p.m. Walt stared at the screen, heart thudding. He hadn't used Zoom before, but he'd watched Mark do it once during a holiday visit, talking to a dozen little faces in tiny squares like it was nothing. He called Casey. "You up for a crash course in video conferencing?" She laughed and said, "Get ready, Mr. Jennings. You're about to become dangerously modern." The next day, Walt sat in front of his old laptop, dressed in a button-down shirt he hadn't worn since Diane's memorial, trying to angle the camera so it didn't catch the stack of magazines on the floor. Casey sat off-screen, coaching him through it. At exactly 3 o'clock, the screen flickered and there they were, Lindsay and a man named Greg. Mid-40s, trim beard, blazer over a t-shirt that said, "Built Not Bought." Greg introduced himself as a senior planner for the city's Innovation Task Force. "We've been looking at ways to reduce surface congestion without expanding lanes," he said. "Most of our modeling is theoretical. Your diagrams, they're surprisingly detailed. Where'd you come up with this?" Walt hesitated. He could tell the truth, or he could try to sound like someone he wasn't. He chose the truth. "I was a city bus driver for 38 years. I had a lot of time to think about what didn't work. I started drawing this up when I was still on the job. Just never had the audience." Greg nodded slowly. "So you're not an engineer?" "Not by title," Walt said. "But I understand flow. I understand load. I've moved more people through this city than most consultants will in their careers. And I've watched what happens when things break." Silence. Then Greg smiled. "That's a better resume than most of the people I talk to." They talked for 30 minutes. Walt explained how the pods could use existing parking garages as loading bays. How the tunnels didn't need to be massive, just efficient. How a neighborhood pilot could prove the model without breaking budgets. When the call ended, Walt sat back, exhausted but electrified. Casey turned to him and said, "You have no idea how rare it is for someone to listen that long." Over the next week, something remarkable happened. Greg emailed again. He wanted more detail. Schematics. Timeline estimates. Budget ranges. Walt didn't have software for that, so he asked Casey for help. She connected him to a local engineering student who offered to build a 3D render using Walt's original designs. The student, Ryan, was fascinated. "You sketched all this by hand?" he asked during their first meeting. "This is like, early-stage Musk stuff. The bones are here. They just need structure." Walt didn't know if he should be flattered or insulted, but he liked the kid's energy. They worked for days in the library conference room, bouncing ideas, debating materials, talking about sustainability metrics and urban zoning laws. It was the most engaged Walt had felt since the year his son was born. One afternoon, as they reviewed a side tunnel module for bike access, Ryan said, "Why didn't you patent this back in the day?" Walt shrugged. "Didn't think anyone would take it seriously. Plus, I didn't know how." Ryan paused. "You still can, you know. There are programs for that now. And you've got me. Let's make it official." On a Thursday morning, Walt submitted a provisional patent application with Ryan's help. It didn't guarantee anything, but it marked something important. A stake in the ground. A declaration. He was in the game now. The next Zoom call with Greg included someone from the mayor's office. They discussed how a pilot program might work. "We're looking at retrofitting an abandoned subway spur downtown," the official said. Could be a good place to start. Walt felt his heart thudding again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was possibility. After the call, he went out onto his porch. The breeze was soft, the kind Diane used to say felt like spring even in fall. Across the street, a boy zipped by on an electric scooter, earbuds in, backpack flapping. Walt watched him disappear around the corner and thought, maybe that kid will ride one of my pods someday. Later that evening, Walt called Mark. It went to voicemail. He tried again. On the third ring, Mark answered, distracted. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" Walt cleared his throat. "Actually, yeah. I just wanted to tell you something. I'm working on a project. Something big. Something I started a long time ago." Mark hesitated. "You mean like, gardening?" Walt chuckled. "No. Bigger. I submitted a transit design. Might be part of a city pilot soon." Silence. Then, "Wait, what?" Walt explained, piece by piece, and as he did, he could hear his son's tone change from polite confusion to genuine interest. "Wow," Mark said at last. "That's really impressive, Dad. I didn't know you were still doing that kind of thing." "Neither did I," Walt replied. There was a pause. Then Mark said, "Let me know if you need anything. I mean it. It's amazing." After they hung up, Walt sat in the dark, the glow of the streetlight casting long shadows across the floor. He looked at the wall above the mantel where Diane's portrait hung, her smile eternal. "You were right," he whispered. "Wild ideas just need time. And maybe a little stubbornness." The next morning, he went walking again. This time, not aimlessly. He walked past old routes he used to drive, through neighborhoods that had lost their spark, imagining underground tunnels humming with quiet energy below them. Not loud. Not flashy. Just movement. Quiet, dependable movement. He wasn't trying to change the whole world. Just his corner of it. And maybe that was enough. The first time Walt walked into the downtown municipal building since his retirement, it didn't feel like coming home. It felt like sneaking back into a place that had moved on without him. Everything looked sharper, sleeker, colder. Glass walls, touch-screen directories, reception desks without people, just kiosks and card scanners. He stood there a moment, taking it all in, the weight of memory pressing down on him like humidity. The last time he'd been here, he'd been in a city-issued uniform holding a cup of black coffee and a folder full of maintenance reports. Now, he was carrying something entirely different, his design. His dream. His plan to reimagine how people moved through the city he'd watched crumble for years. He checked in at the front desk, well, technically, the kiosk, and waited as his name flashed on a screen above. Ryan met him in the lobby, backpack slung over one shoulder, enthusiasm barely contained. "You ready?" he asked, eyes bright. Walt nodded. He wasn't sure if ready was the right word. Nervous? Definitely. But under it all, there was a thread of something else. Confidence. Not because he expected success, but because he finally knew why he was here. This wasn't about proving his worth to anyone anymore. It was about fulfilling something he owed to himself. They took the elevator up to the 4th floor, where the City Transit Pilot Review Committee met twice a month. The room wasn't grand, just a long table, a projector screen, and a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking streets Walt once knew like the back of his hand. The city looked different from up here. Smaller, maybe. Or maybe just more fragile. Lindsay was already inside, reviewing papers with a sharp-looking man in a dark gray blazer. "That's Greg's boss," she whispered as Walt and Ryan walked in. Deputy Director of Infrastructure Strategy. Walt wasn't sure what that title even meant, but he nodded anyway. Greg greeted them with a firm handshake, and within minutes, the meeting began. "We've been reviewing community-based proposals for our downtown corridor revitalization initiative," the deputy director began. This one, submitted by Mr. Walt Jennings and his associate Ryan Ng, stood out for its creative use of existing assets, cost-effective design, and integration with ongoing regional transit goals. Walt looked at Ryan, eyebrows raised. That sounded like they were taking him seriously. Greg gestured for them to present. Ryan connected his laptop, pulling up a sleek animation of Walt's tunnel network model. Walt took a deep breath and stepped forward. I spent my whole career watching this city move, he began. And I've seen firsthand what happens when that movement slows, or worse, stops. What we're proposing isn't a fantasy. It's a pilot. A real-world, small-scale demonstration that can be scaled later. It uses retired infrastructure, modular pods, minimal disruption to street-level services, and could be up and running within 18 months with proper backing. The room was quiet. The projection cast a glow over Walt's lined face as he walked through each phase of the proposal: excavation plans using modern boring methods, modeled in part on boring company strategies, staging areas built into underused parking structures, electric pod prototypes adaptable to ADA requirements. Ryan explained the tech specs. Walt handled the narrative. He told them about the missed opportunities he'd seen over the decades, the budgets wasted on band-aid solutions, the communities left stranded by broken routes, the elderly residents waiting an hour in the cold for buses that never came. Movement isn't just about logistics, he said. It's about dignity. That line landed. He could feel it. Eyes shifted. Heads nodded. Even the deputy director leaned forward slightly, as if hearing something he didn't expect from a man in his 70s. When they finished, the committee asked questions, smart ones. About safety, about zoning, about funding models. Walt answered each with the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need to impress, just to be understood. When the meeting ended, no one made any promises, but Greg pulled him aside near the elevators. "You did something today, Walt," he said. "They're talking. That's rare." By the time Walt got home that evening, the sun was casting long orange shadows across the floor. He sat at the kitchen table, poured himself a glass of ginger ale, and just sat there, letting the silence wrap around him, not heavy this time, but full. His hands trembled slightly, the way they always did when the adrenaline wore off. He looked over at the hallway, where Diane's photo hung. "You wouldn't believe it," he said aloud. They actually listened. Over the next few weeks, things moved faster than he expected. Emails turned into meetings. Meetings turned into site visits. Greg sent over a feasibility report marked, preliminary green light, conditional approval. The city wanted a working prototype. A 100-foot stretch of tunnel with a pod test run. Walt's design. His specs. They wanted it in 6 months. It felt like winning a race he didn't know he'd entered. He could barely keep up. But he didn't do it alone. Ryan took lead on the engineering documents. Casey helped organize community outreach events. And Lindsay connected them with a nonprofit specializing in urban innovation grants. One night, while organizing blueprints in his garage-turned office, Walt's phone rang. It was Mark. "I've been reading the articles," his son said. "The city pilot. The tunnel test. Dad, you're making headlines." Walt laughed softly. "Most of it's Ryan's doing. I just got the ball rolling." There was a pause. "I'm proud of you," Mark said. "I should have said that a long time ago. I think I forgot who you were outside of just being my dad." Walt swallowed hard. "I think I forgot who I was for a while, too." A few days later, a reporter from the Chronicle called. "We're doing a piece on urban visionaries over 60. Your name came up." Walt nearly dropped the phone. He agreed to an interview, surprised at how natural it felt to tell the story again. The dreams, the decades, the silence, the spark. And Elon Musk. The man who unknowingly reminded him that dreams didn't expire, they just needed a spark. "Would you ever want to meet him?" the reporter asked. Walt chuckled. "He's not the point. The idea is the point. I don't need to meet the spark to light my own fire." That weekend, the city hosted a public showcase event. They unveiled renderings of the pilot tunnel, introduced the team behind it, and displayed a life-size mock-up of the transit pod. Walt stood beside it, arms crossed, smiling as kids climbed inside and imagined zipping through tunnels under the city. An elderly woman approached him, walking slowly with a cane. "Are you the man who designed this?" she asked. "Part of the team," Walt replied. She nodded. "I used to walk 2 blocks to catch the number 9. Now the closest stop is 10 blocks uphill. This thing, it might let me move again." "Thank you." Walt blinked back the sudden emotion in his throat. "That's the whole reason," he said. "Movement is dignity." As he stood there, watching people explore the pod, touch the walls, ask questions, he realized this was the emotional breakthrough. Not the headlines. Not the Zoom calls. This. Seeing people engage with something he once thought would die with him. Seeing them believe. It didn't erase the years of silence, the doubts, the dismissals, but it redefined them. They weren't failures. They were just the long curve of a plan finally finding its moment. That night, Walt walked again. Through the city core, under the glow of street lamps, through alleys and sidewalks and pedestrian bridges he once drove past without a thought. He moved slower now, but not from pain. From reverence. He was seeing his city with new eyes. Not just as it was, but as it could be. And for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. He was part of something. A team. A project. A future. As he passed the library, he saw Casey inside, helping a young boy with the computer catalog. She looked up, saw him, and waved. He waved back, then turned toward home. There were more meetings ahead. More tests. Maybe even setbacks. But the tunnel had been broken through, not under the city, but inside himself. And nothing could close it now. Walt Jennings stood inside the abandoned transit yard, among rusted rails and shattered ticket booths that whispered the echoes of his past life. Once this place pulsed with movement, with schedules and greetings, with the hum of Route 5 just beyond the depot door. Now, vines crept through cracks in the pavement, weeds grew in the old trolley slots, and the silence pressed against him in every corner. He'd come here not in search of inspiration but to confront the ghosts of his own hesitation, the ones that told him his glide rail dream had died with Diane. He made his way to what used to be his office. The door barely hung on its hinge, groaning a protest as he pushed inside. Most furniture was gone, broken, removed, forgotten, but one corner held its ground. A solitary filing cabinet stood there, swollen with age. With trembling hands, he pulled open the top drawer. It released a cloud of dust, and there, nestled inside, were his original glide rail sketches. Yellowing graph paper, curling edges, delicate lines drawn with pencil and hope. He pressed a design flat on a makeshift desk. The pneumatic tubes beneath surface streets, compact pod modules, layered layers of movement that once felt impossible. Memories flooded in, Diane's voice saying, "Your dreams will matter, even if no one listens," the rattling of his transit radio, route mantras on winter mornings, checking altimeters in tunnels. Tears blurred the line work, but underneath them was something firm, a heartbeat of longing. He wasn't done yet. He rolled up the drawings again, stuffed them under his arm, and stepped out into the fading daylight determined, for the first time in years, to treat the blueprints not as relics but as reminders that momentum can be reignited. At home, he dusted off the old coat closet and pulled out the whiteboard Casey had helped him set up. He sketched in fresh ideas, a modular stop with neighborhood access, ADA-compliant pod doors, grid-powered charging nodes, simplified routes. The lines wobbled at first, but as he drew, clarity returned. He annotated, labeled, drew arrows of light where water might have been. He felt alive. The next day, he met Casey at the library, with his updated sketches in one hand and the old ones rolled in the other. She flipped through them, brow furrowing, then brightening. "You're refining," she said. "That's good. That's momentum." Momentum. The word struck something deep. These sketches weren't about validation anymore. They were about not staying quiet. They were about movement, physical and emotional. She helped him scan them, upgrade the blog post. "Let's move under, not over," he wrote. He didn't expect comments, but later that evening, a message appeared: "I'd ride something if it wasn't a cold wait." It was small, but enough. Friday brought an invitation to the planning department. They were drafting proposals for community improvement grants. Maybe a micronode pod stop could be part of it. Walt walked there slowly, through cracked sidewalks, boarded shops, a chipped bus stop, living the grief of decline and the pull of possibility. Inside, he spoke about connection for seniors, families, and people like him who felt erased by time. No technical jargon, just honesty. When he left, nothing had been promised, but that didn't matter. He felt like a bridge again. Weekend brought Lindsay and Ryan to his house. Coffee cups, blueprints, animated sketches. Ryan sketched neighborhood access points, Lindsay raised ADA-level questions. They built, they speculated, they argued lovingly about route efficiency and energy usage. Walt glimpsed his reflection in the oven door, stooped but steady, gray-haired but awake. Elon Musk's words echoed, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." Musk embraced failure as stage one of newness. That line felt like permission. Walt realized then, his years of silence, his waiting, weren't failures, they were incubation. Momentum doesn't require glamour. It needs belief. Walt Jennings returned home late that evening with his spirit crashing into exhaustion, the living room lamp casting a tired glare over his latest diagrams. He tried to stay optimistic, but the city's initial buzz was fading like a dying ember, and with it, his confidence jolted. The community forum, once a small haven of encouraging words, now teemed with objections: old man's fantasy, waste of tax money, dangerous and impractical. One commenter even wrote, "Let him rest." The words felt like cold water poured over him, numbing him in the moment, as if the weight of age and relevance had finally caught up. For the first time in weeks, he considered quietly folding the whole thing. The pod prototype. Ryan's 3D model and Casey's scans and Lindsay's ADA notes. Too much. Too late. The city might never greenlight the test tunnel. He looked at the untouched cup of lukewarm tea on the table and thought, maybe this was just a dream. A relic of better days. He shoved that thought deep down and slept fitfully, the shapes of tunnels and pod doors swirling behind closed eyelids. When morning came, societal judgment hung over him like fog. But as he wandered toward the kitchen for coffee, something caught his eye: the filing cabinet where Diane's high school picture stood, smiling like a lighthouse in the darkness. He leaned over and whispered, "You said they'd need wild ideas. You said mine still did." The memory of her voice felt like a nudge. Shaking off the doubt, he called Greg. Heart pounding, he left a message: "Would like to discuss navigating public feedback." He called again 5 minutes later. Finally, Greg answered, a note of fatigue in his voice. Walt swallowed and asked if the negativity would kill the project. Greg sighed. "That's politics, Walt. Loudest complaints get heard. But there are undercurrents too: neighborhood associations, green groups, urban activists who want this. We're not giving up. We just need to navigate." On the wall above the kitchen table, Diane's photo nodded in quiet approval. Later that day, he met Ryan and Casey in the library again. They'd printed out the comments: blunt, nasty, some snide. But hidden among them were thoughtful questions: how will it affect basement moisture? Will alley access be safe at night? Can residents be included in the design process? Walt sat with the stack, breath crackled. These weren't dismissals. These were prompts. Invitations to clarify, connect, and actually listen. They spent the afternoon drafting answers, not rebuttals, but invitations to dialogue. Casey reached out to a neighborhood newsletter. Lindsay agreed to host a virtual Q&A. They framed it as a public listening session rather than a pitch. That evening, Walt found an old quote clipped from the news coverage. Elon Musk, after multiple SpaceX rocket failures, said, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." He taped the quote to his filing cabinet. Under it, he wrote in pencil, "Not giving up." The next day, the city's forum buzzed again, not with mockery, but curiosity grudgingly peeking through. One resident asked, "If my kids could walk into their school through a brighter tunnel, would you build it?" That question shifted the tone. The virtual Q&A was scheduled. Emails poured in as RSVPs. On the night of the session, Walt watched his reflection in the blank computer screen as people joined, elderly residents, curious students, transit skeptics, even a teenage girl with #NotTooOld in her username. His stomach tightened, but he clicked Start. Lindsay moderated. Walt spoke quietly, clearly. He acknowledged fears, cost, safety, change. He answered directly and welcomed more voices. "This is our tunnel. Not mine. It needs every one of us to matter." By the end, the mood had warmed. A woman from a local senior center said she'd help canvass for support. A high schooler offered to make posters. The tone had turned. Late that night, Walt stood at Diane's grave. Head bowed, he said, "They listened. We're still in." He paused, looked at the sky. "We're still in." That weekend, community volunteers helped hang flyers at bus stops, in the library, by churches. The tangible support rooted Walt's promise into soil. He walked along Route 9, tapping the flyer's sleeve on a lamp pole, thinking of flow again, not just traffic, but support passing through people, building momentum. A week later, Greg called. "We've been clearing objections. The pilot tunnel budget is being refined. We can cut through a residential median if we keep it under 15 feet wide." Walt's breath caught. That's enough, he thought. Enough to begin. Walt walked home slowly, holding the city's early support in his heart. At home, he unrolled the original glide rail sketches and overlaid them with notes: add community node, add safety lighting, add volunteer tech review. Slowly, proudly, he updated the design to reflect not just his idea, but their hopes. The next day, the pilot came before the city's transportation board. Walt sat in the back, eyes dry behind his glasses. When it was his turn, he stood, old bones protesting. He spoke softly, commanded only because he spoke from the depth of care. He didn't start with tunnels, he started with neighbors. With dignity. With movement. With reconnection. Greg presented technical data, Ryan presented renderings. When they finished, the board spent 10 minutes asking questions. No need for correction, they were genuinely engaged. The board took a vote. The project wasn't green-lighted yet, but it had passed. The pilot was approved for funding proposals, land surfaces, and community liaisons. Outside the room, Lindsay hugged him. "You did it," she said. Walt shook off tears but nodded. He'd done it. They'd done it. At home that night, he sat by Diane's photo, drew a new sketch: the pilot tunnel path beneath a median, the pod platform shining underground, community benches above. It wasn't the finished system, but it was proof that even old ideas, when given room and kindness, could spark new momentum. He leaned back in the chair and whispered, "We're moving again." The city beneath them stirred. And so did Walt. Walt Jennings stared at the glow of the laptop screen late into the night, his shoulder aching and his mind racing. The diagrams birthed in his garage were now 3D rendered animations, thanks to Ryan's skill. From simple paper sketches, they transformed into virtual tunnels pulsing beneath the city, pods rolling through illuminated corridors mapped with precision. Walt felt unnerved, awed, convinced, terrified. He still had no engineering degree, but here he was, collaborating on something real. Something that could matter. Ryan leaned over, eyes bright. "This is solid," he said, adjusting lines on the screen. Clarifies the path, energy nodes, passenger flow. It's not vintage, but vintage keeps working. Walt nodded. He felt older, but not obsolete. Nights earlier, he'd almost given up after backlash and doubts in the forums, but now, with every turn of the model, he felt something shift deep inside, momentum. Next morning, Casey arrived with plans for a prototype control panel. She had learned basic CAD tools and borrowed components from a makerspace. A small screen, a dial, an emergency stop button emblazoned with attention-grabbing red. Even if just symbolic, Casey said, this gives people a point of contact, not just concept, but control. Walt thought of Elon Musk's words, the first step is to establish that something is possible, then probability will occur. That's exactly what they were doing, making possible visible, tactile, believable. Together, Walt, Casey, Ryan, and Lindsay, they headed to the city's tech fair showcasing local innovations. Their booth was humble, a life-size pod mock-up corner, the glowing control panel, the 3D render playing on loop. Visitors approached hesitantly, journalists, neighbors, curious students. One woman touched the pod wall, turned to Walt and said, This feels safe. A student asked how fast the pods could go. A local builder asked about materials and excavation. Each question gave Walt the chance to tell the story, not just of tunnels, but of hope rediscovered. He felt alive again. Later, Greg pulled him aside. This is changing the narrative, he said quietly. They used to think you were just an old dreamer. Now people see you as a builder. Walt felt joy, and relief, and a soul lightness he thought he'd forgotten. At home that evening, he found a reposted Musk quote in an article, if something is important enough, even if the odds are not in your favor, you do it. He underlined it on a sticky note and placed it by Diane's photo. He imagined her nodding in approval. Yes, he thought. That was what he'd done. He bet on possibility, not because he was certain he'd win, but because it mattered too much to abandon. Walt's phone buzzed with invitations. Casey had lined up a virtual panel on senior innovation. Lindsay secured a teen development league to build a scaled prototype. Ryan found a grant competition for modular urban transit. It was dizzying, and beautiful. As he prepared, nerves coiled in his stomach. He wasn't sure he deserved any of this, but something inside whispered that he needed to keep going. Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. That thought gave him permission to be imperfect, to risk being wrong for the chance to do something right. The panel was held online. Walt, Casey, and Ryan spoke shyly at first, bright logos behind them on screen. And then stories poured out, residents who couldn't make the bus in winter, teens who said they'd volunteer for something that felt like real change, a retired teacher who said she was proud of someone my age doing something new. Messages flowed in, likes, hearts, supportive comments. Walt realized he was no longer invisible. He was visible in a good way. 2 days later, an email arrived from the grant program. Your project has been shortlisted for design funding, it read. Walt felt his chest go empty, and then fill. This was momentum. Action, not expectation. The world didn't owe him belief, but he'd earned some. That night, he sat in his chair and wrote a letter, to Diane, to his younger self, to anyone who still thought old age meant quiet endings. He told them he was still dreaming, still building, still moving. He signed it, from someone who remembers how to matter. The city's heartbeat quickened in the spring sunlight as Walt walked briskly toward City Hall, a folder of fresh proposals clutched in his hand. The air was thick with the scent of blooming magnolia trees mingled with the faint exhaust of morning traffic. Around him, the city stirred, a mix of hurried footsteps, rolling delivery carts, distant sirens, and birds singing from their wired perches. To the untrained eye, it was just another busy day, but for Walt Jennings, it was the dawn of something he'd long thought impossible. Inside the grand marble building, polished floors reflected the buzz of officials moving purposefully between meetings, their conversations laced with bureaucratic jargon that often felt impenetrable. Walt navigated through the crowd, the familiar weight of years pressing on his joints but not his spirit. He remembered a time when he had been the one behind those polished desks, a young transit planner with dreams of transformation. Now, decades later, he was back, not as a mere consultant but as the catalyst for a new vision. The Transportation Committee meeting was already underway when Walt entered. City planners, engineers, and council members sat around a long table, faces both curious and skeptical. The atmosphere crackled with the energy of debate and the hum of potential change. Walt took a deep breath, smoothing his tie, steadying the nerves that still crept in despite his years of experience. Greg was there, of course, seated beside Lindsay, her presence a steady anchor of support. As Walt laid out the latest design refinements, highlighting community feedback integrated into the plans, he noticed a shift, a softening in the room's posture. The hard edges of doubt gave way to tentative interest. He spoke of tunnels not just as infrastructure but as veins of connection threading the city together, especially for those who felt forgotten, the elderly, the disabled, the working class. "We're not building a gimmick," Walt said quietly but firmly. "We're creating a lifeline. A system that moves people efficiently, safely, and with dignity. Our pods can reduce congestion, lower emissions, and provide access to those sidelined by existing transit." Questions followed. How would safety be ensured? What about maintenance costs? Could the system integrate with existing networks? Each query was met with clear, honest answers, many drafted with Lindsay's research and Ryan's technical insights. The board's skepticism was genuine but no longer dismissive. It was engagement. After hours of discussion, the committee agreed to recommend a pilot program, a limited test beneath a carefully selected residential area with community input driving the process. It was a victory, measured but meaningful. Walt felt the familiar flutter of hope mixed with the weight of responsibility. Back outside, the city's pulse felt different to him. Passing a worn bus stop shelter, he saw an elderly woman waiting, wrapped in a scarf against the morning chill. Their eyes met briefly, and she smiled, a small gesture but enough to remind him why he fought. Change wasn't just about technology, it was about people. The following weeks were a whirlwind of community meetings, media interviews, and late-night brainstorming sessions. Walt found himself speaking more often, his voice steadier, the conviction deepening. Local news picked up the story, framing it as a breakthrough led by a man who refused to fade quietly into the sunset. He remembered Elon Musk's words echoing in his mind, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." It was a mantra he clung to, a beacon in the face of challenges. One evening, at a town hall gathering, Walt stood before a crowd of diverse faces, young families, seniors, activists, skeptics. Questions came fast and sharp, but so did the answers. He shared not just the vision but the story behind it, the losses, the hopes, the late nights fueled by determination. By the end, applause filled the room, tentative but genuine. Walking home later, he passed under streetlights casting long shadows, thinking about the journey. The city wasn't just responding, it was awakening. At home, he pinned a letter on the bulletin board, a message from a local high school student inspired to volunteer on the project. Walt smiled, feeling the threads of community weaving tighter. Diane's photo on the mantel caught his eye, and he whispered, "We're moving forward." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Walt Jennings sat quietly in the corner booth of the bustling coffee shop, the rich aroma of roasted beans filling the air around him, mingling with the chatter of strangers and the soft clinking of cups. His fingers nervously tapped a worn leather-bound notebook, filled with sketches, notes, and the faintest traces of hope. The city outside was awakening to spring, buds pushing through cracked sidewalks, a reminder that life could emerge from even the most hardened places. He was waiting for a meeting that could change everything, though he wasn't sure if he was ready. His project, the underground transit pilot, had gained momentum, but there were still walls to break through. Opposition from some council members lingered, and funding remained a patchwork of promise and uncertainty. Walt's years had taught him patience, but patience was a fragile thing when dreams hung in the balance. Across the room, the door chimed, and in walked a tall woman with an air of calm confidence. She scanned the cafe briefly before her gaze landed on Walt, and a warm smile spread across her face. This was Vanessa Brooks, a city planner known for her unconventional ideas and sharp intellect. She had heard about Walt's project and, after some initial skepticism, had become intrigued by its potential to transform urban transit. "Walt Jennings?" she asked, approaching the booth. "I'm Vanessa. Thanks for meeting me." Walt stood to shake her hand, sensing an energy that was both familiar and new. "Please, have a seat." As they settled in, Vanessa pulled out a tablet, flipping through pages of data, maps, and demographic studies. "I've been reviewing your pilot proposal. It's ambitious, and I mean that in the best way. The city needs bold ideas like this, especially to serve our aging population and underserved neighborhoods." Walt nodded, feeling a flicker of validation. "It's not just about tunnels or pods. It's about connection. Giving people who feel forgotten a way to move, to engage, to be part of the city's future." Vanessa's eyes lit up. "Exactly. And that's why I want to help. There's a grant coming up, state funding earmarked for innovative public transportation projects with community impact. I think your pilot fits perfectly. But you'll need solid data, community backing, and a strategic plan to win it." Walt felt a surge of excitement tempered by realism. "I've got community support growing, and my team is working on technical details. But this grant, it could be the key." Vanessa smiled. "I'm here to guide you through it. Consider me your ally in the city halls and council chambers." For the first time in months, Walt allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "I could use an ally." Over the next weeks, their partnership grew. Vanessa introduced Walt to influential contacts, helped refine proposals, and navigated the labyrinthine city bureaucracy. She challenged him to think bigger, to anticipate obstacles, and to articulate the project's impact with clarity and passion. Their meetings stretched late into the evenings, often fueled by shared coffee and determination. One night, as they pored over budget sheets and timeline estimates, Walt confessed, "I never thought someone like you would believe in this. Maybe I've been too cautious about who I trust." Vanessa looked at him thoughtfully. "Sometimes, the people who need to believe in you most are the ones you least expect. But belief alone isn't enough. It takes grit, persistence, and a willingness to face setbacks head-on. I see that in you." Her words echoed Elon Musk's famous mindset: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. Walt felt those words wrap around his heart, anchoring his resolve. As the grant deadline approached, the team rallied. Ryan refined the technical models, Casey prepared detailed schematics, Lindsay gathered testimonials from community members who shared stories of isolation and hope. Walt practiced his pitch relentlessly, determined to convey the human side of the project, the lives that could change beneath the city streets. The day of the grant presentation arrived with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Walt stood before the panel, a diverse group of officials, engineers, and community leaders. His voice was steady as he spoke, weaving together data and narrative, vision and practicality. He didn't just talk about infrastructure, he spoke about possibility, about reclaiming relevance in a world that often seemed to move too fast for people his age. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before questions flowed, some sharp, some supportive. Walt answered each with honesty, never pretending to have all the answers but always emphasizing the commitment behind the project. Days later, the announcement came. Walt's pilot program had won the grant. The city would fund the first phase of construction and community engagement. The victory was more than financial, it was a public affirmation that his idea, and by extension, he himself, still mattered. That night, Walt stood at Diane's grave, the soft glow of a street lamp casting long shadows. "We did it," he whispered. "You were right. It's never too late." The city around him seemed to breathe with new life. For Walt, the unexpected ally had not just brought resources but reignited a fire that had flickered too long in the dark. The morning sun filtered through the cracked window of Walt Jennings' garage, dust motes dancing like tiny stars in the golden light. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal, mingling with the sharp tang of freshly cut concrete samples scattered across the workbench. For years, this humble space had been his refuge, a silent witness to dreams half forgotten and plans waiting to be born. Now, it was the nerve center of something far bigger, a project that was no longer just about him but about the city and its people. Outside, the sounds of the city stirred, distant honks, the rhythmic clatter of a train on the elevated tracks, footsteps echoing off the pavement. The hustle and bustle seemed a world away from the quiet determination unfolding underground. Walt ran his hand along the rough surface of a tunnel boring machine model Ryan had built for demonstration, a miniature marvel of engineering, delicate yet powerful. It reminded him of the promise beneath the city's surface, tunnels that could breathe new life into a weary metropolis. The construction of the pilot tunnel had begun in earnest. After months of planning, surveys, and permits, crews had started excavation under a quiet residential block, a testbed for what could become the city's future. Walt had spent every spare hour visiting the site, watching the workers as they peeled back layers of earth, inch by inch, revealing the hidden arteries of possibility. He often thought back to Diane, her steady smile and unwavering support, and wondered what she'd say now. Would she be proud? Or would she worry about the risks? Walt allowed himself the moment to grieve before pressing forward, their shared dreams now his legacy. The pilot tunnel was small but precise, a feat of modern engineering meshed with the raw grit of manual labor. The hum of the boring machine was a constant companion, a low, steady vibration that Walt felt in his bones. It was a sound of progress, of resistance met with persistence. Ryan and Casey had worked tirelessly on the pod designs. Compact, sleek, and accessible. The control systems Casey had developed promised safety and simplicity, a way for anyone, young or old, to summon a pod and move swiftly beneath the city streets. Lindsay had coordinated community outreach, gathering stories from residents eager to see the project succeed. One afternoon, Walt stood at the edge of the excavation site, the fresh earth piled high and the scent of damp soil sharp in the air. The city skyline rose in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the blue. Here, in this quiet, dusty place, the future was being carved out, slowly but surely. A group of workers approached, handing Walt a hard hat emblazoned with the pilot program's logo. "You ready to take a look inside?" their foreman asked with a grin. Walt nodded, heart pounding. He had read about tunnel inspections in textbooks but never imagined he'd be part of one. With the protective gear in place, he descended into the temporary shaft, the air cooler and tinged with the earthy scent of freshly unearthed rock. The walls were rough but sturdy, illuminated by strings of work lights casting long shadows. As he walked the narrow path, the reality of the project hit him with a visceral force. This was no longer a dream or an idea. This was real. And it was beautiful. The sound of machinery echoed softly from deeper within, a rhythmic dance of man and machine. Walt imagined pods gliding silently through these passages, ferrying neighbors to jobs, doctors' appointments, grandchildren's homes. The thought lifted something heavy from his chest, the burden of time and loss replaced by a flicker of hope. Emerging from the tunnel, Walt's phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa: "City Council meeting tomorrow. Big opportunity to secure more support. You've got this." He stared at the screen, nerves flaring. Public speaking had never been his favorite thing, but this was bigger than fear. This was about proving that someone his age could lead change, that hope could be built one tunnel at a time. The council chamber was packed the next evening, the air thick with anticipation and skepticism. Walt took his place at the podium, the faces before him a mix of officials, journalists, and citizens. He began simply, telling the story of the pilot tunnel, the team's journey, the community's voices, the promise beneath their feet. He saw nods from the elderly couple in the front row, a teenager clutching a notebook filled with questions, a local business owner who had faced years of traffic woes. Walt's voice grew stronger as he spoke, fueled by the fire of purpose. When the presentation ended, the room erupted in questions, some challenging, some hopeful. Walt met each with honesty and passion, drawing on his experience and the unwavering support of his team. By the meeting's close, a resolution was passed to expand the pilot program, securing funds for additional tunnels and pods. Walking home under a sky smeared with stars, Walt felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The city was responding not just with words but with action. He was no longer invisible, he was a force for change. At the garage, he opened Diane's old journal, flipping to a page where she had written, "The future belongs to those who dare to build it." Walt smiled, knowing he was doing just that. The tunnel beneath the city was more than concrete and steel, it was a testament to resilience, to reinvention, to the enduring power of dreams. And for Walt Jennings, it was only the beginning. Walt Jennings sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the soft glow of the television flickering across the faded wallpaper and stacks of transit plans scattered across the coffee table. Outside, a cold rain tapped steadily against the windowpane, a rhythmic reminder of the gray day pressing in on the city. His shoulders slumped as he stared at the screen showing news headlines about delays and budget overruns in the city's new transit projects. Headlines that, despite the pilot tunnel's promise, echoed old fears: city projects stall again, public skepticism grows, can innovation save a failing system? The weight of it all pressed heavily on Walt's chest. Months of tireless work, community meetings, and engineering breakthroughs suddenly felt fragile, threatened by forces beyond his control. The unexpected ally, Vanessa, was busy navigating political minefields, and his team, while passionate, was stretched thin. Walt felt the gnawing anxiety creeping in, the old doubts whispering louder than ever. "What if it's too late?" he muttered to himself, voice barely audible over the rain. The question had haunted him before but now felt sharper, edged with the fear of failure. He glanced at Diane's photo on the mantel, her eyes seemingly asking him to hold on. The city that had once felt like a canvas for possibility was suddenly a maze of obstacles. Meetings with contractors dragged on with frustrating delays. A council member he'd counted on voiced opposition, citing cost overruns and risks. Rumors swirled that funding might be pulled. The pilot program, so full of hope, teetered on the brink. At the next project update, Walt's frustration was palpable. Ryan's technical optimism clashed with the harsh reality of red tape and skepticism. Casey suggested redesigns to cut costs, but Walt knew shortcuts could jeopardize safety and trust. Lindsay's reports from community surveys revealed growing concern among residents, some afraid of construction disruptions, others doubtful of the benefits. During a late-night call with Vanessa, Walt's voice cracked. "Maybe I was fooling myself. Maybe this dream is too big, or maybe it's just not meant to be." Vanessa's steady voice cut through the doubt. "Walt, every great innovation faces moments like this. It's not the size of the dream that matters but the strength to keep pushing when everything feels against you. Elon Musk didn't stop at the first failure, he used it to fuel his next move." Walt sighed, the reminder sinking in but the burden still heavy. He looked back at the framed quote on his wall: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." It was a mantra he tried to live by, yet now felt like a mountain he had to climb alone. The next morning, Walt forced himself out of bed and walked the familiar streets of his neighborhood. The cold drizzle dampened his coat, but the city's quiet resilience stirred something in him. At the bus stop, a frail elderly man struggled with a walker, his face etched with weariness. Walt helped steady him, the man's grateful smile a reminder of why the project mattered. That evening, Walt attended a community forum organized to address concerns about the pilot tunnel. The room was packed, voices raised in frustration and fear. A mother worried about noise disturbing her children's sleep. A small business owner fretted over access disruptions. Some questioned whether an aging man like Walt truly understood their struggles. Walt stood at the podium, heart pounding but determined. He spoke candidly, acknowledging the challenges and fears. He shared stories from the project team, people who had dedicated their lives to making this work, not just for progress, but for connection and dignity. He didn't have all the answers, but he promised transparency and commitment. By the forum's end, some skepticism remained, but there was also a new thread of hope, tentative but real. Walt realized that doubt was part of the journey, not its end. Returning home, he found a message from Ryan: new prototype pod tests show improved safety features. Might help ease some concerns. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Walt sat back in his chair, exhaustion mingling with resolve. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with obstacles old and new. But the spark that had begun with a single step beneath the city streets was still alive. It flickered stubbornly in the face of doubt, reminding him that transformation was never easy, but always worth fighting for. The morning sun spilled through the half-open blinds of Walt Jennings' modest apartment, casting long, golden beams onto his cluttered desk, where blueprints and technical schematics lay scattered like puzzle pieces waiting to be solved. Outside, the city stirred with the promise of a new day, cars humming to life, pedestrians bustling with purpose, birds flitting between streetlights. But inside Walt's space, the air was charged with something quieter, more potent, the palpable tension before a breakthrough. Months of setbacks, doubts, and delays had worn heavily on him and his team, yet today was different. Today, they were unveiling the latest pod prototype, the culmination of tireless nights, endless calculations, and relentless persistence. Casey's fingers had trembled only slightly as she placed the final sensor on the dashboard, and Ryan had barely managed to suppress a grin when the new safety protocols passed their last simulation test. Walt stood quietly in the corner, the weight of expectation pressing upon him. He thought about Diane, her steady presence in his memories, the way she always urged him to keep dreaming, no matter how daunting the journey. He could almost hear her voice whispering, "You're not done yet, Walt." The testing facility was buzzing with activity. Engineers adjusted cables, technicians monitored screens displaying live data, and a small crowd of city officials and community members gathered to witness the moment. Vanessa, ever the steady force beside Walt, gave a nod of encouragement. "This is it," Walt murmured, stepping forward as the pod hummed to life. The sleek vehicle, no larger than a compact car, glistened under the fluorescent lights, its smooth curves promising speed, safety, and accessibility. A quiet hum vibrated through the floor as the pod's electric engine powered on, sensors flickering in anticipation. Ryan climbed into the driver's seat, his face a mask of focus tinged with excitement. He ran through the checklist one last time, then gave a thumbs up. With a press of a button, the pod rolled forward, gliding smoothly along the test track, a miniature version of the tunnels beneath the city. Walt's breath caught as the pod navigated curves and inclines with flawless precision. The new safety features worked seamlessly, obstacle detection activated, emergency braking tested, communication systems functioning flawlessly. Monitors displayed real-time diagnostics, each green light a testament to hours of work. As the pod completed its circuit, applause erupted among the onlookers. Walt felt a surge of pride but tempered it with the knowledge that this was just one step on a long path. Still, the moment shimmered like a beacon, a breakthrough after months of struggle. Later, during the debrief, Vanessa approached Walt. "This could change everything," she said, her voice low with excitement. "The city council will want to see these results. It's time to push for full funding." But Walt was already thinking beyond the council chambers. He imagined pods whisking through tunnels beneath crowded streets, connecting neighborhoods, shrinking distances, and giving freedom back to those trapped by age, disability, or circumstance. The thought ignited a fire deep within him, a reminder of Elon Musk's words: "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. That night, as Walt prepared his presentation for the upcoming council meeting, he found himself drafting a new letter, not just to officials but to the community. He wrote about resilience, about hope, about reclaiming the future at any age. He signed it simply, Walt Jennings, a man who refused to fade quietly. The council meeting was packed. The room hummed with anticipation, skepticism, and curiosity. Walt stepped to the podium, feeling the familiar rush of nerves and resolve. He began not with numbers or technical jargon but with a story of a city held captive by its own inertia, of people waiting in silence for a chance to move again. He showed the test results, the safety features, and the community feedback. He introduced Ryan and Casey, who spoke passionately about the pod's design and impact. Vanessa closed the presentation by outlining the economic and environmental benefits. The room leaned in, caught in the web of possibility. After hours of discussion, questions, and debate, the council voted unanimously to approve full funding for the expanded tunnel network and pod deployment. The chamber erupted in applause, an acknowledgement not just of a project but of a vision brought to life through persistence and courage. Walking home under a sky awash with stars, Walt felt the familiar warmth of accomplishment mixed with humility. He thought of Diane, the city, the people who had believed, and those who still needed to be convinced. This breakthrough was theirs, proof that transformation was possible at any stage of life. At home, he sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like embers in the night. Change was no longer a distant dream, it was happening beneath their feet. And Walt Jennings was right in the middle of it, proving every day that age was not a barrier but a bridge. The morning after the council's resounding approval felt surreal to Walt Jennings. The city seemed to pulse with newfound energy, a rhythm syncing with his own heartbeat. But as the early sunlight filtered through his kitchen window, casting long shadows across the cluttered countertops, a nagging unease crept in, reminders that not everyone shared the optimism. While many cheered the project's success, a growing chorus of critics had begun to raise their voices, and Walt knew this was only the beginning. The local newspaper's headline was blunt, "Tunnel Dream or Tunnel Trap?" Concerns mount over city's expensive transit gamble. The article outlined fears about escalating costs, construction delays, and the possibility of disruption to neighborhoods already struggling. Social media lit up with debates, some voices hopeful, others skeptical, even hostile. A city divided, Walt realized, was a city challenged. At a nearby cafe, Walt met with Lindsay, who had been tracking community sentiment closely. She looked up from her tablet, brow furrowed. "There's a lot of pushback from residents in the affected districts. Noise complaints, worries about safety, and fears that the project might displace local businesses." She sighed. "We need to do more than just build tunnels and pods. We have to build trust." Walt nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. They're right to be worried. Change is hard, especially when it feels forced. But this isn't about tearing down communities, it's about connecting them. Over the following days, Walt threw himself into outreach efforts. He attended neighborhood meetings, listened to stories of frustration and fear, and acknowledged the real challenges construction brought. In one town hall, an elderly woman named Mary stood up, her voice trembling as she spoke about the noise waking her each night. Walt listened, heart aching. "We're working to minimize disruption and ensure safety," he promised. "Your comfort and well-being are our priorities." Slowly, barriers began to shift. Small groups who had opposed the project found themselves engaged, contributing ideas for noise reduction and community support. Walt's team launched a dedicated hotline for concerns and updates, and Vanessa spearheaded a public relations campaign highlighting personal stories of residents who stood to benefit. Yet, the critics were not easily silenced. At a packed city forum, a well-known activist challenged Walt directly. "How do you justify spending millions on tunnels when so many people here struggle with housing, healthcare, and basic needs? Isn't this a luxury project for the few?" The question hung heavy in the air. Walt took a deep breath, the memory of Diane's unwavering belief in justice steadying him. This project is about improving lives, creating access to jobs, doctors, family, and opportunities for everyone. It's not a luxury, it's an investment in our city's future. We must address immediate needs, yes, but we can also build infrastructure that lifts all of us together. The room buzzed with murmurs, some approving, others still doubtful. Walt understood that winning hearts was as important as winning votes. Change wasn't just about technology, it was about people. That evening, as he walked through his neighborhood, Walt saw glimpses of the city's complexity, the young couple struggling with childcare, the veteran sitting alone on a park bench, children playing in a cracked playground. The tunnel project was a piece of a larger puzzle, and he vowed to keep listening, learning, and adapting. At home, he scrolled through messages from supporters around the country, many elderly, many feeling invisible and left behind. Their words of encouragement reminded him why he had started this journey, to spark hope where it had dimmed, to prove that reinvention was possible at any age. Late into the night, Walt drafted a new letter to the community, one that spoke not just of progress but of partnership. He invited residents to join advisory councils, volunteer teams, and open forums. "This is our city," he wrote. "Together, we will build a future that honors our past and embraces tomorrow." As weeks turned into months, the tension between critics and supporters shaped the project's path. Construction crews adapted schedules to reduce noise during sensitive hours. Local businesses received support through grants and promotions. Community art projects celebrated the city's spirit, weaving stories of resilience into murals near construction sites. Walt found himself growing in unexpected ways, learning diplomacy, empathy, and the power of listening. He realized that leadership was not about having all the answers but about creating spaces where voices could be heard and valued. One afternoon, Vanessa pulled Walt aside after a particularly heated meeting. "You're doing something remarkable," she said softly. "It's not easy facing this kind of scrutiny, especially at your stage in life. But you're changing more than just transit, you're changing minds about what's possible." Walt smiled, gratitude swelling in his chest. "I was never too old to care, or to fight. Maybe I just needed to see that out loud." That night, as the city settled beneath a sky glittering with stars, Walt stood on his balcony, the sounds of distant construction mingling with the hum of life below. The journey was far from over, doubt and resistance remained, but so did hope and determination. The tunnel beneath the city was no longer just a passage for pods, it was a pathway toward connection, understanding, and the belief that every voice mattered. Walt Jennings sat quietly in the back corner of the crowded community center, the buzz of voices rising and falling like waves against the walls. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the faint scent of old wood and polished floors, a comforting blend of familiarity and promise. It was another town hall meeting, another opportunity to bridge divides, but today felt different. The room was packed tighter than usual, faces lined with curiosity, hope, and a flicker of skepticism. Walt scanned the crowd, catching the wary eyes of longtime critics, the hopeful glances of supporters, and somewhere in between, a new presence, a figure who would change everything. Her name was Margaret Ellis, a respected city councilwoman known for her sharp wit, no-nonsense attitude, and deep roots in the community. Walt had heard whispers of her opposition. She was cautious about the tunnel project, skeptical of its promises, and vocal about prioritizing immediate social needs over grand infrastructure plans. Yet here she was, sitting quietly in the crowd, her gaze fixed intently on the speaker. As Walt stepped up to the podium, his heart thudded with the familiar blend of nerves and resolve. He began by acknowledging the city's challenges, rising costs, community concerns, and the very real fears people carried. "I know this isn't easy," he said, voice steady, "but progress never is. It demands patience, courage, and partnership." When the floor opened for questions, the atmosphere thickened. Voices raised concerns about budget overruns, construction disruptions, and whether the project truly served those most in need. Then Margaret's hand rose. Walt felt a ripple of tension. She stood, her presence commanding attention. "Mr. Jennings," she began, voice measured but firm, "I've watched this project closely. At first, I saw only risks, costs spiraling out of control, promises that seemed too good to be true. But after visiting the pilot tunnel, speaking with your team, and listening to the residents, I see potential. Real potential." A hush fell over the room. "I'm still cautious," she continued, "but I believe this project can be part of a larger solution. We need to ensure it benefits all, especially our most vulnerable. I want to work with you to make that happen." Walt felt a surge of relief and hope. This unexpected ally's endorsement was a breakthrough, proof that dialogue and persistence could transform opposition into partnership. Over the next weeks, Margaret and Walt began meeting regularly. Their conversations were frank and sometimes challenging, but always productive. Margaret's insights into the city's political landscape and social dynamics complemented Walt's technical knowledge and community connections. Together, they forged strategies to address critics' concerns while advancing the tunnel's development. Margaret introduced Walt to key leaders from housing advocacy groups, public health officials, and local business owners. These new allies brought fresh perspectives and voices to the conversation, helping the project evolve from a technical endeavor into a holistic community initiative. One evening, as they reviewed plans in Walt's garage-turned-command center, Margaret looked around at the sketches, models, and data displays. "This isn't just about tunnels and pods anymore," she said softly. "It's about hope. About proving that we can still dream big, no matter our age or circumstances." Walt nodded, touched by her words. "Diane used to say that the future belonged to those who dared to build it. I think we're starting to prove her right." The collaboration brought tangible results. Construction schedules were adjusted to minimize neighborhood disruptions. A new program was launched to support displaced small businesses during the build. Educational workshops helped residents understand the project's benefits and safety measures. The city began to shift. Skepticism softened, replaced by cautious optimism. Media coverage highlighted the growing coalition working to ensure the tunnel served everyone, not just a privileged few. At a public unveiling of a new tunnel segment, Walt stood beside Margaret, addressing a crowd that now included once critical voices turned advocates. Children waved flags, local musicians played, and banners proclaimed, "Building our future together." Walt felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. The journey had been long, fraught with doubt and resistance, but moments like this made it all worthwhile. He thought of Diane's smile, the spark that had ignited this entire quest. He realized that the project was no longer just his, it belonged to the city and its people, woven into their stories and hopes. Later, as the crowd dispersed under a sky streaked with twilight hues, Margaret turned to Walt. "You've shown all of us that age is no barrier to impact. If anything, your experience and heart have been the project's greatest strengths." Walt smiled, a quiet pride swelling within him. "I was never too old to matter. I just needed to find the right allies." That night, as he sat alone in the quiet of his home, Walt reflected on the power of unexpected partnerships, the way they could transform skepticism into strength, division into unity. The tunnel beneath the city was more than a passageway. It was a symbol of possibility, resilience, and the enduring belief that change was always within reach. Walt Jennings sat in the dim light of his study, the walls lined with photographs that traced the arc of a life well lived. There was Diane's warm smile frozen in time, his daughter's graduation cap, and faded snapshots of the city streets he had walked for decades. Tonight, though, the images felt distant, almost fragile, overshadowed by the growing weight pressing on his heart. The tunnel project, which had sparked hope and renewed purpose, now exacted a toll he hadn't fully anticipated. Months of relentless work had pushed Walt beyond his physical limits. His joints ached from long days spent pacing construction sites and late nights poring over designs. The nagging cough that had started as a mild irritation had worsened into something more insistent, leaving him breathless during meetings and forcing him to rest more often than he wanted to admit. Yet, despite his body's protests, Walt's mind raced with ideas and worries, funding deadlines, community concerns, and the fragile thread holding the coalition together. The phone call that evening from his daughter, Emily, was brief but piercing. "Dad, you sound exhausted. Are you taking care of yourself? Mom would want you to slow down." Her voice carried both love and worry, a reminder of the life outside the project's relentless pace. Walt promised he was fine, but as he hung up, he felt the sting of distance, the widening gap between his mission and the family that had once been his anchor. The following day, at the hospital for a routine checkup, the doctor's words were gentle but firm. "Walt, your blood pressure is high, and your lungs show signs of stress. You need to take this seriously." The doctor's concern echoed Emily's earlier warning. Walt nodded, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. He had poured so much energy into the tunnel's future that he had neglected the most fundamental foundation, his own health. Back at the project headquarters, Walt's team noticed the change. Casey gently suggested he take a break, but Walt brushed it off. "There's too much at stake," he insisted, the stubborn fire in his eyes refusing to dim. Vanessa, ever perceptive, cornered him one afternoon. "Walt, you can't build the future on an empty tank. You have to take care of yourself, your family, your health. You're not alone in this." The tension between Walt's drive and his body's limits grew until a fainting spell at a construction site forced an urgent decision. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, surrounded by machines and worried faces, Walt faced a truth he had long avoided. His passion for change had to be balanced with self-care. The project, and his life, depended on it. During recovery, Walt wrestled with frustration and fear. The tunnel was advancing, but his absence felt like a betrayal to the team and the city. He worried about losing momentum, about being replaced by younger, faster voices. Yet, through the fog of fatigue, he recalled Elon Musk's words about resilience, not just enduring hardships but learning to adapt and grow. Emily visited regularly, her presence a balm. One evening, she sat beside him, holding his hand. "Dad, you're a fighter. But even fighters need rest. Your story, your work, it's not just about speed. It's about endurance and heart. We need you here, healthy and whole." Walt nodded, tears slipping quietly. In that moment, he realized that true strength wasn't just pushing forward blindly but knowing when to pause, to lean on others, and to honor the life that fueled his dreams. Slowly, he adjusted, delegating more, embracing rest, and reconnecting with family. He found that stepping back didn't mean giving up, it meant making room for renewal. The team rallied in his absence, inspired by his example of vulnerability and determination. Months later, Walt stood once again on the edge of the pilot tunnel, breathing deeply, feeling the pulse of the city beneath his feet and the steady beat of his own heart. He understood now that the journey was as much about preserving himself as it was about transforming the city. The tunnel was no longer just a symbol of innovation but a testament to resilience, the courage to face not only external obstacles but the internal battles we all endure. Walt Jennings had learned that the greatest legacy wasn't the tunnels beneath the city but the strength to keep building, even when the personal cost was high. The neighborhood around the tunnel's newest entrance had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. The old brick buildings lining Main Street bore fresh coats of paint, storefronts buzzed with renewed activity, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the crisp autumn air. Walt Jennings walked slowly down the sidewalk, his cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. Despite the lingering ache in his joints, a smile lifted the corners of his mouth. This was the moment he had hoped for. A tangible sign that the city's heart was beating stronger, that the community was embracing the future they had fought so hard to build together. The tunnel entrance stood proudly at the corner of Elm and Fifth, its sleek design blending modern innovation with the character of the historic neighborhood. A mural adorned one side, depicting vibrant scenes of people from all walks of life connected by glowing threads, symbolizing the new transit network and the bonds it fostered. Children laughed nearby, their backpacks bouncing as they waited for the pod shuttle, while older residents sat on benches, chatting and watching the activity with curious eyes. Walt paused by a kiosk displaying community stories, letters and photographs from residents describing how the project had changed their lives. One letter caught his eye, from Mary, the elderly woman who had once voiced fears about noise. She wrote about the quiet nights now, thanks to soundproofing improvements, and how the pod had given her a chance to visit her grandchildren without the hassle of long bus rides. Her words were simple but powerful, a testament to the human impact beneath the technical marvels. As Walt continued, he was greeted by familiar faces. Mrs. Alvarez, the bakery owner, handed him a warm croissant. "Thanks to the project, foot traffic has doubled," she said with a proud grin. "I never thought I'd see Main Street this lively again." Nearby, Marcus, a young father, shared how the tunnel's accessibility had helped him get his wheelchair-bound mother to her doctor's appointments more easily. The stories flowed, each one weaving a richer tapestry of community revival. At the small park adjacent to the entrance, a gathering was underway. Local musicians played soft tunes while volunteers handed out hot cider. Walt was invited to speak, and as he stepped onto the makeshift stage, the crowd's applause felt like a warm embrace. He looked out at the faces illuminated by string lights, old friends, new allies, skeptics turned supporters, all united by a shared vision realized. "Thank you for believing," Walt began, his voice steady but heartfelt. This project wasn't just about building tunnels or pods. It was about building connections, between neighborhoods, between generations, between dreams and reality. Each of you played a part, each voice mattered. He spoke of resilience and hope, recalling the moments of doubt and the power of community to overcome fear. "We are proof that it's never too late to change, to rebuild, to reclaim our place in the future." As he spoke, Walt's eyes caught Margaret Ellis in the crowd, her smile genuine and proud. Their journey from cautious allies to partners in transformation mirrored the city's own evolution. After the speech, Walt mingled with the crowd, sharing laughs and stories. A young woman approached him, tears shining in her eyes. "I'm 68, she said softly. "For years, I felt invisible, like life was passing me by. This project, and your story, showed me that I can still make a difference. Thank you." Walt's throat tightened. "You're never invisible," he replied gently. "Every day is a chance to rewrite the story." As twilight deepened, Walt found a quiet moment on a bench, watching the pods glide silently beneath the streets, carrying passengers toward new horizons. The city had transformed, but so had he. From the man haunted by loss and doubt to the leader who had inspired a movement, Walt's journey was a testament to the power of community and the enduring human spirit. In the days that followed, the neighborhood continued to thrive. New businesses opened, parks were revitalized, and residents, once divided, found common ground. The tunnel was more than infrastructure, it was a living, breathing symbol of what could be achieved when people came together. That night, as Walt lay in bed, he reflected on the path that had brought him here. The setbacks, the victories, the unexpected friendships, they all coalesced into a profound truth, that age was not a limit but a launching pad. The future belonged to those who dared to believe, to act, and to connect. And in that belief, Walt Jennings found not just a new chapter for his city, but a new beginning for himself and all those who had been waiting for permission to matter again. Walt Jennings sat quietly in the packed auditorium, the warm glow of stage lights casting long shadows across the faces before him. The city's annual Innovation Award ceremony was in full swing, celebrating breakthroughs that shaped the future. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, Walt was not just a spectator, he was the honored guest, the symbol of a journey few had believed possible, a man who had redefined what it meant to grow older, to lead, to inspire. As his name was called, applause erupted like a wave, carrying him to the stage. Standing at the podium, Walt felt the weight of every moment that had brought him here, the early doubts, the late nights, the community's embrace, and the personal costs. The tunnel project had evolved from a daring dream into a transformative reality, not just beneath the city's streets, but within the hearts of its people. He looked out at the crowd, seeing faces young and old, allies and skeptics, united by a shared vision. "I never imagined I'd be standing here," Walt began, voice steady but rich with emotion. "When I first started, many told me it was too late. That I was too old to make a difference. But age is not a barrier. It's a reservoir of experience, resilience, and wisdom. This project, our city's future, is proof that change can come at any stage of life." He spoke of Diane, his late wife, whose belief in the impossible had ignited his own spark. He recalled Elon Musk's words about fearlessness and reinvention, lessons that had guided him through uncertainty. "We are all capable of transformation," Walt said, "if we dare to act, to listen, and to believe." The audience rose in a standing ovation, a moment of shared triumph and hope. Backstage, Margaret Ellis greeted him with a firm handshake and a smile. "You've left a legacy that will last generations," she said. "Not just in tunnels and pods, but in hearts." In the days that followed, the recognition brought new opportunities and challenges. Walt was invited to speak at universities, city councils, and innovation summits, sharing his story as a beacon for those who felt left behind or forgotten. His message was clear: no matter the obstacles, it was never too late to dream and to build. Yet, amidst the accolades, Walt remained grounded. He returned often to the neighborhoods transformed by the project, listening to stories of newfound independence and connection. He mentored younger leaders, encouraging them to blend passion with empathy, technology with humanity. One afternoon, Walt visited a local high school, where students gathered around him eagerly. A young woman asked, "How did you keep going when things got hard?" Walt smiled. "I remembered that progress isn't a straight line. It's full of setbacks and leaps forward. But the key is to keep moving, to find your purpose, and to let others walk with you." As autumn leaves drifted through the city streets, Walt found solace in quiet moments, walking in the park, reading letters from residents, and tending to a small garden Diane had planted years ago. The legacy he was building was more than concrete and steel, it was a living testament to hope, resilience, and the power of community. That evening, as the city lights twinkled below his window, Walt penned a letter to Emily and her children. "I want you to know," he wrote, "that the greatest gift isn't the tunnel or the awards, but the courage to keep believing in a better tomorrow. Our story is far from over. It's only just beginning." And with that, Walt Jennings closed one chapter and opened another, a future bright with possibility, where age was not an end, but a powerful new beginning. Walt Jennings stood at the edge of the construction site, the sharp scent of wet earth and steel mingling with the cool morning air. The sky was overcast, heavy with a threatening gray that mirrored the tension settling in his chest. After years of progress, months of community support, and countless victories, this was the moment that could unravel everything. A sudden, unexpected obstacle had emerged. A legal battle over environmental concerns threatened to halt the tunnel project indefinitely. The news hit Walt like a thunderclap. After all they'd sacrificed, after all the hope they'd kindled, the future now seemed uncertain once again. The city council was divided. Vocal activists argued that the tunnel endangered a fragile ecosystem beneath the city. Opponents seized the moment to rally, calling for a complete shutdown. Media outlets churned out stories filled with fear and skepticism. Even some supporters wavered, their confidence shaken by the growing storm. Walt could feel the weight of doubt pressing down on him, a suffocating reminder of the fragility of dreams. But deep inside, the fire that had carried him this far refused to extinguish. Walt knew that every great endeavor faced setbacks, that the path of change was never smooth or assured. He thought of Elon Musk's relentless drive, the way he had faced countless obstacles and failures but never lost sight of his vision. "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor," Walt whispered to himself, the mantra steadying his nerves. Determined to fight, Walt rallied his team and allies. They organized community forums, environmental assessments, and expert panels to address concerns transparently. He reached out to Margaret Ellis, whose political acumen was now invaluable. Together, They crafted a strategy that balanced innovation with responsibility, a promise that progress would honor the earth as much as the people. The battle spilled into public hearings, tense debates where Walt faced pointed questions and fierce opposition. He listened carefully, acknowledging fears and admitting imperfections. "We are not perfect," he told the assembly, voice unwavering, "but we are committed to learning, adapting, and ensuring this project is part of a sustainable future. We owe that to our children and their children." His humility and honesty softened some hearts, but the challenge remained daunting. The legal process dragged on, threatening to stall construction and drain resources. Walt's health, already fragile, felt the strain. Still, he pressed on, buoyed by the support of the community and the belief that they were shaping something bigger than themselves. One evening, exhausted but resolute, Walt stood beneath the city's skyline, the tunnel's glowing entrances like beacons in the dusk. A small group of volunteers gathered nearby, holding candles in silent solidarity. Their quiet vigil was a powerful reminder that the fight was not just his, it belonged to everyone who dreamed of a better tomorrow. Walt's daughter, Emily, came to his side. "Dad, you're not alone," she said gently. "We're all with you. And no matter what happens, your work has already changed lives." Tears welled in Walt's eyes. "I want to believe that," he whispered. "But the future feels so fragile." Emily squeezed his hand. "Fragile things can be strong, too. They just need care and courage." With renewed resolve, Walt doubled down on collaboration, working with environmental experts to design new safeguards, engaging with community leaders to build consensus, and sharing the story of the tunnel's purpose far beyond transportation, a symbol of resilience, unity, and hope. Months passed. The legal battle reached a turning point when a respected environmental group, impressed by the project's adaptive measures, publicly endorsed the tunnel. The city council voted narrowly to allow construction to resume under strict oversight. The victory was bittersweet, hard-earned and tentative, but it reaffirmed Walt's belief that perseverance and openness could overcome even the toughest barriers. As work resumed, Walt felt a profound sense of closure to a chapter marked by challenge and growth. That night, as he lay in bed, the hum of the city alive with progress beneath him, Walt reflected on the final challenge. It was not a defeat but a lesson. That true legacy is forged in the fire of adversity, tempered by courage and compassion. He closed his eyes, imagining Diane's smile, the laughter of children in the tunnel's light-filled corridors, and the city's future unfolding with possibility. He was ready, not just to finish the project, but to inspire others to believe that the greatest challenges could also be the greatest opportunities. The fight wasn't over. But Walt Jennings had proven that even in the twilight of life, a single spark of determination could ignite a revolution. The first light of dawn crept over the city skyline, casting a golden hue that painted the streets and buildings in warmth and promise. Walt Jennings stood quietly on the observation deck of the newly completed transit hub, the gentle hum of pods gliding through tunnels beneath his feet like the heartbeat of a city reborn. The crisp morning air filled his lungs, a sharp contrast to the heavy breaths he'd taken months before, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a profound peace settle deep within him. This was more than a culmination, it was a new beginning, not just for the city but for himself and all those who had dared to dream alongside him. Around him, people of all ages moved with energy and purpose. Children laughed as they explored the sleek stations, elders smiled, seated comfortably with easy access, and young professionals carried the city's pulse forward, each journey a thread weaving a new tapestry of connection. The tunnel was no longer just infrastructure, it was a lifeline, a symbol that progress and inclusion could coexist, that no one was left behind in the rush toward tomorrow. Walt's thoughts drifted to Diane, her steady encouragement echoing in his mind. He could almost hear her voice, warm and steady, "This is just the beginning, Walt." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photo of her, worn at the edges but vibrant with memory. He kissed the image gently, a silent thank you for the courage she had given him when he felt lost. Nearby, Emily approached, her eyes shining with pride and relief. "Dad, it's incredible," she said softly. You made this happen. Walt smiled, the years of struggle and sacrifice crystallizing into a quiet joy. We made this happen, he corrected, glancing at the diverse crowd bustling around the hub. It took all of us, neighbors, friends, even those who doubted at first. This is their victory as much as mine. Together, they walked through the station, the sleek design blending seamlessly with the historic character of the neighborhood. The soft lighting, the polished floors, the gentle whoosh of pods arriving and departing, it all spoke of a future shaped by respect, innovation, and heart. Walt paused before a plaque etched with the names of the community members who had contributed time, expertise, and faith. His own name was there, but it felt less important than the collective story it represented. The project had been a mirror reflecting the city's soul, flawed, hopeful, resilient. As the day unfolded, a ribbon-cutting ceremony marked the official opening. Local leaders, families, and press gathered, cameras flashing and voices rising in celebration. Walt stepped to the microphone, his voice steady and clear. Today, we open more than tunnels. We open doors, to opportunity, to connection, to hope. This is proof that it's never too late to change, to dream, to build a legacy. For every person who's ever felt forgotten, this is your new dawn. The applause was thunderous, but Walt's heart was quiet with fulfillment. Later, as the crowd dispersed, a young man approached him nervously. "Mr. Jennings, I'm 67, and your story inspired me to start my own business. Thank you for showing me it's never too late." Walt shook his hand warmly. "Keep going. Your journey is just beginning." That evening, Walt returned home to his quiet study, the familiar photographs now glowing with new meaning. He penned a letter to the city, a message of gratitude and encouragement. "We are the authors of our futures," he wrote, "and the stories we tell today shape the world tomorrow. Let this be a reminder that age is not the end but the start of something beautiful." As the city lights twinkled below, Walt felt a deep connection to the generations before and after him. His journey, sparked by doubt and fueled by courage, had become a beacon. The tunnels beneath the streets carried more than passengers, they carried dreams, hopes, and the unyielding spirit of a community that refused to fade. In the quiet that followed, Walt smiled, knowing that this new dawn was just the first light of many. The future was wide open, and with it, endless possibilities. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?